the title of your talk is Groundhog's Day.
It is. And you're going to really love this. There's so much data that I actually made this part 1 of Groundhog Day. There's going to be more. I can't wait. It's going to be pretty
It's not
hectic.
going to just be the same data over and over
I was
again.
going to say, is it going to be the same talk?
I mean, that would be a good idea. And I might do that just for fun anyway, but no. Building blocks.
So your talk also ties into the ITSP magazine podcast you recently launched.
It does indeed. The National Blast, we're going to talk about that in some kind of detail, specifically as we start thinking about, critical infrastructure and critical infrastructure protection. I myself really love all of the things that DHS has done in the last 15 to 20 years since they've been stood up, and all of the ways that they've been trying to protect critical infrastructure, perhaps without the best of budgets and without the best of maybe execution authority and legislation. And I hope to continue to take on that topic in my podcast. We'll see.
Super exciting.
Yay.
And we've got Nicole launching her podcast in the fall. Podcast Palooza coming.
All
So
the
many good content. So much good content coming out.
Trisha, when are you launching a podcast?
Please. I have so many projects I've started and won't continue that I can't add that one to another one. I am enamored with the art behind you, by the way, Keenan. I'm not. Yes. Love it. Love it so much.
Well, it's not my favorite, but it's definitely one of my favorites. In fact, the person who made it for me, I think it was a photograph of something with the Suchi and Joel podcast that we did not too long ago, and we took a photo, and the artist reached out and he was like, "It made me so proud to see my artwork on the wall." And
oh,
I liked it.
That's incredible. Yeah, love it. Love it. It's always fun seeing everybody's backgrounds, what they're, you can tell the people who do this all the time, they've got this awesome setup, and I don't know, super cool. It's really fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know about the awesome setup. This is just how I, keep myself sane most of the time. But I have seen people have really remarkable setups, right? The green screen behind them so that they can have all of the digital media, and just, it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. It is a lot of work. Alyssa Miller earlier.
Oh yeah. She's
amazing. Oh yeah, for sure.
So Keenan, what's the story behind that picture?
Behind that picture?
Mm-hmm.
So when I was in the Army, I was going through EOD school, which is Explosive Ordnance Disposal School. And I was married. And my first husband, Steve, who's really just a great guy, and also kind of wanted to be an artist for a little bit before he changed his mind and wanted to be a police officer. And then I think he might have changed his mind again and wanted to be a lawyer. But, we were all trying to figure that out. As I was going through EOD school, he was working a couple of different things. And as we got closer and closer towards graduation, I always had a little bit of a fascination with the original painting, which is the businessman in a bowler hat. And so he replaced the apple, he made his own, and replaced it with a bomb with a very nice long fuse. And it just reminds me of a time where I definitely was going through some adversity and trying to get through EOD school and do all the things that I wanted to do in the world. And yet there were wonderful people around me who were there to support me and there to help me and there to make sure that I was the best badass that I could be. So that's the story.
That's beautiful. Love that. It was so great.
Also on podcasts, we have to give a shout out to Micah Brown for the Threat Real podcast.
Yep.
So a podcast that has already been in existence.
You get a podcast.
I wonder how many of our speakers have podcasts.
I think all of them. We should just have a podcast con. Right? I think
in a way, that's kind of what this is.
Yeah, kind of.
Just, with a PowerPoint, which is optional.
Is it optional? I wish I would have known that earlier. Man, it made my life easier. That's okay. It's part one.
Nobody made you do anything, Keenan.
No one ever does. I do feel really left out of the loop here. Like I'm trying to find something pointy I can put on my head to make me feel like doing the unicorn thing here. Is that gonna work?
Perfect. Perfect.
It's not gonna work. Hold on.
Do you want me to get a picture of that? No, it
No.
didn't last long enough. Okay. You want to bring up your slides if you do have them, which it sounds like you worked so tirelessly
I do.
on.
They're super fancy slides. Yeah, they're gonna be great. Part one though, again, part one. Digging into some serious stuff here. Okay, so can you see yourselves or can you see my slides?
We can see your slides.
Awesome. Well, I am ready when you guys are.
And we are ready because you are.
Awesome. Well, hey, everybody. No intros or anything. I just get to start talking. This is kind of fun. So no shit, there I was in the 3rd grade. I pushed my sister Edie down the stairs. Oh wait, that's the wrong thing. Hi, Keenan Skelly. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about living with some very interesting legislation and challenges that the Department of Homeland Security and CISA and others have, really faced over the last 15 years as we've been trying to crack the nut of, critical infrastructure security. So the talk is called Groundhog Day, Living with Bad Legislation for Critical Infrastructure Over and Over and Over and Over Again. Who am I? I'm an interesting individual that had, the great fortune a long time ago to work for the Department of Homeland Security in the early days and really get to see some of that critical infrastructure being played out and that how we were trying to protect it at the time. But today, I'm the CEO of a company called Shadow Bytes, an advisor for a couple of different things, master of games at Women's Cyber Society, Cyber Jutsu, because I really love anything that's gamified. A host for a podcast that we're going to talk about actually a little bit more as we continue on through this afternoon, because it's going to be very pertinent if you want to know all the other things that come after part one of this talk, and a bunch of other, stuff, which is great. And you can reach me at any time at Twitter at Keenan Skelly, or for the podcast at Blast National. So let's get into some fun stuff. In overview, I talk a little bit about the fact that critical infrastructure from the very beginning has been something that's very complicated in terms of trying to legislate, in terms of trying to wrap our minds around how we could possibly even begin to protect all of these things. When you start tearing apart all of the pieces that include critical infrastructure, it's everything. It's everything around us. It's our water, it's our energy, it's our nuclear power plants, it's how transportation gets a train full of something to, the port of New Orleans and ships that around the world. And these are the very things that make our global economy work. They're very, very complicated and very important. Within DHS alone, when we're talking about critical infrastructure, we're talking about 16 different sectors, and each of these sectors is owned by private owners and operators. These aren't government folks. These aren't necessarily, DOD folks, although in some cases DOD does have some of the assets. So as DHS has grown over the last, number of years and started to really address critical infrastructure, these are the kinds of things that they have to really consider when it comes to how do we protect the nation's critical infrastructure and key resources, and how do we start applying cybersecurity to each of them, knowing that kind of is the basis, or at least a foundational element of each. So as I said before, I'm going to break this down into a couple of different parts. So today you're going to be very lucky enough to see part number 1. And I wanted to go back in time a little bit and talk about how we got from, DHS started here, and then here we are right now, and we're doing all of this great cybersecurity stuff, and we're really getting engagement from owners and operators, and everybody's really interested because of all of the threats that we've experienced. But what were all the things that happened on the way to that? So that's something we're going to talk about a little bit more. Now, I'm going to go way back to the beginning. So where did it all start? The Department of Homeland Security, created in 2002 as a direct result of a lot of the things that happened during 9/11. I myself was still in the military during 9/11 and experienced kind of the national response plan of our country played out at the highest levels possible. And when DHS was created, I was really inspired to be a part of that agency because there were so many things that we just hadn't really worked through in terms of national response plan that didn't include the Department of Defense, right? That did not include all of the other things that had to happen to respond to something that was so, massive and so pervasive as 9/11. So as DHS came out, I myself really, really wanted to go work there, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. I still love the entire idea, and I love Homeland Security. But if you think about this from a more broad perspective, imagine anybody here who's actually worked for the government ever for more than 5 minutes. Imagine that you're going to take 22 agencies from around the country who all have their own, executive orders that are ruling them, their own legislative bodies that are telling them what they can and can't do, their own regulations, their own business processes, and you're going to bring all 22 of them together and say, we need you to get on a common operating picture, even though the authorities that you may have had may not be relevant anymore, even though the policies that created you may not be relevant anymore. So we have to start thinking about, before we even get to where we are today with DHS, you have to remember what DHS was built on. It was built on a conglomeration of agencies who all had something to offer to protect the homeland, but that by no means, means that it was a perfectly smooth transition, right? Now I'm going to do something really, really uncool. I'm going to escape and make sure that I turn Microsoft Outlook off because I don't want you guys to be tortured with that the rest of the time we're on the talk here. So, what happens next? We have Homeland Security. We've got all of these agencies coming together and saying, we have a tough job ahead of us. We need to figure out how we can protect all of the things that are important to our country. So a little bit later, I think it was 1 year later, almost exactly, critical infrastructure came out and people said, I think we should probably be paying attention to these things, right? The nuclear power plants, the water treatment centers, manufacturing, transportation, all of these things. I think transportation was probably the most visible, and everybody had eyes on it because of 9/11 and because transportation security was crucial and something that we cared about as Americans. So the Homeland Security Presidential Directive 7 came out and said, we need to be able to identify, prioritize, and protect critical infrastructure and key resources within this country. And part of that means we actually have to figure out what that is, right? What does that even entail? Is that the mom and pop store down the street? Is it all of the transportation, all of the train lines that run across the entire country? Is it maybe something as, complicated as chemical facilities who actually, make chemicals that people can make bombs out of? If you start really thinking about critical infrastructure and what it is, the very basis of our economy and who we are, then you start to realize how scary it is when people want to attack it or want to do bad things against it. So not just identifying what those things are, but prioritizing them. At the time, Homeland Security was very small still as an agency with not a ginormous budget, and trying to identify which ones of those things we could possibly go out and protect is not an easy task. lots of algorithms and fighting and gosh, I remember Pat Burt, and I'm not sure anybody here will actually remember her, but kudos to Pat Burt for being an evil genius way beyond her time. But then we had to figure out how to protect them, right? Because it's important and it's part of our country and who we are as Americans, right? So no pressure, by the way, DHS, hey, protect everything. All of the things, really, seriously, everything. We want you to make sure that you're protecting healthcare. We want to make sure you're protecting communications. We want to make sure that the dams and the water systems that, you know, take water to millions of people on the West Coast, that those things are never affected. We want to make sure that as Americans, we are doing everything that we can to protect these key things that, you know, help us thrive as a country and help us move forward. So 16 critical infrastructure sectors were outlined, and DHS worked together with a lot of different agencies to determine sector-specific agencies. And I'll let Bryson correct me because I'm talking about in the old school days, but I believe they have a new name now. But those sector-specific agencies were really designed to say, you have the responsibility to ensure personnel, physical, and information security of these things, right? We're not going to give you any budget for that. we're not going to give you any kind of regulation for that, but through industry partnerships, through working together, this is your task to go out and figure out how we can make critical infrastructure safer so that we can make America safer, right? So, you know, I know my experience with DHS, but I talked to a lot of people over the last couple of days about, you know, critical infrastructure and in the olden days and the difference between information security and cybersecurity as we really see it today. And for everybody who, you know, has been in this field for a hot minute, information security and cybersecurity are the same thing to us. We've just, you know, changed the way that we look at it and changed the way that we deal with it. But right away within the Department of Homeland Security, it was recognized that information security and cybersecurity were extremely important when it came to critical infrastructure. So, you know, wait, what is this cyber thing? Maybe we should get a little bit more involved in it and try to figure out what we can do to help, right? So in 2013, under the Obama administration, an executive order 136, improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity came out. And I always feel like, you know, this was almost like the cart before the horse kind of thing. You know, we figured out very early in you know, general terms that it was actually very important that cybersecurity is established as an underlying dependency for everything that we do. There is not a single one of the 16, you know, critical infrastructure sectors that doesn't rely almost entirely on information security and cyber. So how do we look at this as something different, as something bigger, but something that's interconnected to really everything that's happening? And I think this was a very key piece of legislation, or I'm sorry, executive order that came out that really put into focus the importance of cyber among other things. But even at this point, you know, it's 2013, there's lots of cyber breaches that are happening, lots of cyber attacks that are happening, but there's still nobody really responsible for doing a whole lot about this, right? Lots of different agencies, again, came together to create DHS, and some of them have really great authority. Take the Secret Service, for example, when it comes to the Treasury and, you know, financial transactions. I mean, the skill that they had there was unmatched when they came into DHS. When you add other, you know, individuals, you add the EISAC, you add the grid, the nuclear facilities in this country, everybody had been working really hard and doing the things that they did best. But the one thing at the underpinning of each of these sectors is cybersecurity, and how are we going to address that as a nation? So when do we get our own agency to just, do this, right? 2018. So in my mind, I go back in time and I look at, 2002 when DHS was first stood up, and all the difficulties that they had just to bring, 22 agencies together and try to make that into something that worked and something that was not perfect, but was functional in protecting our nation. And then a year later, recognizing that critical infrastructure is the underpinning, the piece that connects everything together, all of those other things, and recognizing that that critical infrastructure has to be protected in a variety of ways. And over these years from 2002, it took us until 2018 to get to the point where, the CISA Act passed and we were able to have an organization that is focused entirely on this. And I really love that this quote here that, Chris Krebs said after it was passed through Congress. And, passing this represents real progress in the national effort to improve our collective efforts in cybersecurity. This is such a big deal, being able to recognize at this level of any kind of department that this is so crucial that it is actually going to change the way that we function as a government and in our private partner, relationships and everything that we're going to do going forward. So it took a hot minute, right, for us to get there. It took a hot minute to get from 2002 all the way to 2018, where, CISA was stood up and it had the ability to start looking at, government things and looking at ways to engage the private sector and the public sector and the states and figure out what we could all do together. How can we all work together to make this mission actually, make sense? But like the agency had always had issues with, and I don't mean this, to be specific to DHS either. I mean, this I would probably say is any massive agency within the United States government, is it's not always clear the things that are absolutely needed until it's absolutely clear. So some of the challenges that they faced were operating budget. If you go back and you look at the last 2 to 3 years of operating budget for CISA, it's 2% or less than 2% of the entire operating budget for the Department of Homeland Security. So that really makes me think, and I kind of stick on that. We decided in 2013 that cybersecurity was so crucial to critical infrastructure that an entire executive order was dedicated to it. But when it came to actually funding the arm of the Department of Homeland Security that had the ability to do something about that, that funding just, wasn't there as much as maybe it should have been. And then there's always the question of to regulate or not to regulate. And I go back and forth with some of my friends in the space on this. It's always wonderful if you can have a carrot to offer to an owner operator, to somebody who has a very, restricted way that they can charge people. They have a very restricted way that they can, hire people. They have this budget that they're operating in, and cybersecurity is so far outside of that budget that they can't even look at it. So, in the history of DHS, they've gone kind of back and forth on, what a regulatory body might look like and what it might not look like, and how that works for owners and operators. And it's never an easy choice. It's never easy to figure out what is better, whether that's the carrot or the stick. In some cases, it definitely has to be the stick, right? There has to be some kind of regulation with teeth. Otherwise, there's no way that a company can justify spending the money to do the kinds of things that they need to, beef up security. And in the past, we had programs that were tied to grant programs, but those weren't really dedicated to helping the owner operator themselves get past the challenges that they face when it comes to cybersecurity. And that's kind of heartbreaking. We've been able to provide grant funding to people who might respond to an incident at those owners and operators, those pieces of critical infrastructure around the country, but we haven't been able to really impact people that work there and how they can get access to things. I believe I had a conversation not that long ago about some of the things that CISA has been doing just to get materials out there so that people can read them and have access to them and start, dealing with what they have to do to make their, a chemical plant or water treatment facility a little bit more secure. But if you are working in that facility and you're already having a hard time being able to, pay everybody to just do the jobs that they're doing, how easy is it for them to spend additional time to try to learn about these types of things? And this, please don't take, I'm not sharpshooting. I'm just saying these are some of the challenges that you have to think about as we talk about the history of how we've gotten to where we are now and why the legislation and the things that are coming out of the next couple, bills and the executive order are so important, because these are real challenges that have been faced and that will continue to be faced. The authority to execute, when you, as a government agency, you put your budget forward, and as a new agency within a much larger agency that's also still trying to figure out what agency it is, because it's still 22 other agencies, getting budget is a difficult thing to do. How do you justify that the budget for cybersecurity is more important than the budget for keeping, nuclear power plants safe, or LNG and LPG and all of these other things that are equally critical in America, that are critical infrastructure for us? How do you do that? How do you fight with the people in your own organization to say this is the most important thing? There's no easy answer to that. Other challenges, consistent political support. And I think, anybody who's worked in government is going to say, well, that's not just DHS, that's every organization. And you're absolutely right. And there comes a time in government specifically where we have to acknowledge the fact that some things are not political. Cybersecurity is not political. It has nothing to do with, your political beliefs, and it has everything to do with simply protecting our nation to the best of our ability. And kudos, all the kudos to Mr. Krebs for, calling that out and having that intestinal fortitude to say it's not about right side or left side, that it's entirely about doing the right thing. Struggles to coordinate across agencies, with 16 sectors, and each of those sectors having a different agency that is, designed to help it regulate itself, that is designed to help it teach itself about all of these things, that it's designed to get them all the information that they need to do. It's still a process, right? I know a lot of people here may or may not have participated in my favorite thing, the interagency working group. And wow, just wow, that's a whole different beast right there, right? When you're working across multiple agencies, and not just at a government level, but at the state and local level, looking at tribal level, trying to communicate with people and make sure that everybody's needs are met in a world where there isn't enough funding, in a world where there isn't necessarily an understanding from the state and the local and the tribal folks about what it is they're supposed to be doing. And there isn't necessarily time on anybody's part to make sure that all of these agencies are doing everything that they can to work together. And then of course, the other challenge here is, how do you get that business? How do you get that oil refinery? How do you get that nuclear power plant? How do you get that water treatment facility that only has 2 people that work there total at all? How do you get them to buy into something that says, we want you to do this and you have to do this because it's important for everyone, but we don't have anything to give you? And we don't have any way to train you, and we don't have any way to ensure that you have everything that you need. These are not easy challenges to overcome. And having been at DHS and working through some of these problems myself, I can only empathize with CISA and with DHS and know that they have been really, truly doing the best that they can. So what next? What happens as we go forward? You know, as I started putting this talk together, I talked a lot about, you know, the Groundhog Day and how we keep seeing the same things happen over and over again. And people just talk about, well, we have to share information, right? Well, if we shared information, everything will be okay. Well, I mean, sharing information is extremely important, yes, but it's more than that. It's the buy-in of the American people. It's the buy-in of everyone in this country to say that this is important enough for us to make massive changes here. And I think we're getting to that point. So what's different right now? What's different today that wasn't there for the last 15 years? Well, we've got cyber at the White House. We have people who are just dedicated to cyber at the White House, talking to the president, talking to the National Security Council, talking to all of these people about how important and pervasive cybersecurity is. We have a president who is going head first into executive orders, into legislation, into things that are going to make a change in how we perceive our security, especially our cybersecurity, our information security. We continue to see nation states and cyber criminals, you know, upping their game. We're starting to see more and more ransomware attacks. We're starting to see an underground of cyber criminals and nation states working together to really change the way that cybercrime is being done. International tensions are here. It is time. It's time. I read just the other day this article and this quote right here. I think it hits right into the fundamental part of everything that I've been kind of talking about up until this point, and that is, you know, everybody right now wants to boost CISA because all of these attacks that we've seen, SolarWinds, Colonial Pipeline, Microsoft Exchange, Cyber Hijack, all of these things continue to build up, and they're not the first, right? It's just the latest in a string of things that we have to take care of and that we have to look at more closely. So again, as I started getting into this talk, and I really decided that I had to break it down into two things. I think, and I truly believe this with all my heart, that without understanding the history of how we got to this point and why we're here, you can't really start to make changes for the future. So the path of DHS, the path of CISA, the path of critical infrastructure and critical infrastructure security in this country has not been an easy one, and it's one that's being written every single day. And when you think about the sheer capabilities that have to be thrown at that beast just to make sure that we're doing the right thing, it's a lot, and it's a lot to think about. So for right now, this is my high-level overview of what I hope is going to be about two more kind of series here that we can talk about and that I plan to talk about on my podcast, The National Blast. And the next one is really to get into all of the bills that are on the floor right now that are responding to the executive order, that are responding to things like the Colonial Hack and others, and make sure that we're making legislation that makes sense, that we're continuing to build on a foundation of, hey, we tried this before and maybe it worked and maybe it didn't. A foundation of bringing the right people from the community, from the private sector, from the states, from the military, from all over the world to help understand what these laws look like and what their second and third order effects are going to be. It's all about digging in to what we have ahead of us right now. We have the ability in this community right here, we have the ability right now to shape the future of cybersecurity and to shape the protection of critical infrastructure in our country. And so I challenge each of you to learn more about it, learn more about where we came from here, and learn more about what we can do to make a difference in the next couple of months, because that's what it is. That's where we're at. So let's do it. Make it better. That's all I have. I think probably turn it back over to Bryson and at least for questions.
So what's going to be in part 2?
What's not going to be in part 2? So part 2 is actually going to dig into every single one of the bills that's on the floor right now and cross-reference them from bills and laws that already exist that cover that or that don't cover that. Part 2 is going to focus more on why don't we take some of the language out of a couple of these bills and focus them into one that actually makes sense for all of critical infrastructure security and not individual slices that might, make sense for one senator's state or for one person's, specific, I hate to say lobby group, but lobby group. This is a whole of nation picture, and we have to start getting better at understanding the whole of nation laws that we have in place already that have executions that, that have teeth that can be executed on, but then also understanding what we don't need right now, which is more legislation that has no teeth, that has no chance of actually changing anything. So that's part 2.
So we got Chris Inglis in the White House. Jen Easterly's finally just been confirmed as the next CISA director.
I know. We're there. We're there. We have the right people at the right place at the right time, and the right things are happening. And we have to, as a community, we have to step up and we have to make sure that we get it right this time, right? Because it's time. It's time right now.
Right now.
Right now.
I put it in the chat and in the Discord. The SSAs are now SRMAs, Sector Risk Management Agencies. That's the new title.
The new buzzword. Yes, I didn't get that far in my history, but
I still say SSA because it's easier, to be honest.
Yeah, I know, and it's what I know. So, but yeah, if anybody has questions about this or how you can help, we are working to put together some cybersecurity folks, not just, policy people or policy wonks, but hackers and CEOs and everyday operators who are doing, all of these things so that we can help inform legislation that makes sense, not just legislation that makes sense for companies, but that makes sense for those of us who are doing the work too. And on that note,
Love it.
So where is part 2 going to debut?
I haven't decided yet. I'm thinking probably Black Hat. That's what I'm thinking.
Ooh.
Black Hat. That's a year away.
Yes, I'm thinking Black Hat, and I have some people that I'm trying to bring in to have that conversation with at the legislative level, who might be able to provide some insight on the kinds of bills that they're working on and the kind of information that they need from the community that might help with that.
That's super interesting. Be an awesome talk.
Great.
Awesome talk.
I'm wondering who these people are now.
Yeah, I know.
You're just gonna have to wait.
So part 2 is a year out, is what we're hearing.
No. A year? What do you mean a year? No. Like
Black
weeks.
Hat. Oh, you're presenting this at Black Hat? Oh, okay.
Cool.
So it would already be up on the site then.
Oh, no. I apologize, Black Hat, please don't sue me. This is not happening during Black Hats. This is a conversation that's going to be going on virtually, not affiliated officially with Black Hat, even though Black Hat, I would love to do that, but that's not what this is.
Got it.
Okay. Where can we
Yeah, I
go
was
for more
getting
information?
Well, I'm going to talk
Is it
a little bit.
mystery? Do we have to have a password to knock on a door?
Yeah, you do. No, I'm actually going to talk about it on one of the upcoming episodes of the National Blast, which is going to be out here in the next week or so. And there's going to be information. The National Blast is about to have its own website. It's been a hot minute, but that's going to be up. And we're going to talk about some of the things that we're doing at Black Hat and who we're going to be talking to and what we're going to try to do with that.
All right.
Good time.
Look forward to it. Yeah.
Super cool.
So questions, anything? Are people asking questions?
No, but we did have some comparisons to because Johnny's from Brazil, so he was commenting on how different it was to hear the insights here versus what he expected, and the difference between state and federal government.
And noting the usage of cyber criminals instead of hackers, which was lovely to see. It's very lovely to see.
Definitely. And that's a whole other soapbox that I can get on in terms of legislation. You can check out my podcast. I've already had at least 3 episodes dedicated to that, and how we need to do better for our non-cyber criminals, our hackers who are out there every day, finding great information and reporting it, and then maybe not being taken care of as well as they should be.
Yep. Legislation, media representation, the whole 9. Just need to kind of
All of it.
overhaul that whole, yes.
Especially, one of the things that I'm watching very closely is this whole breach verification piece that Senator Warner and some others are working on. I think that when it comes to defending the hacker, the security researcher, the individuals who are out there doing that, I think breach verification is exactly where that conversation needs to happen, since these are the people who are bringing the breach forward, and they're also the people who are most likely to get, kind of screwed by the companies who simply don't want to admit it. Right? They don't want to admit that they've had a breach. They don't want people to know that that's happened. So they're going to do pretty much anything that they can to make it go away. So I think that that's where we need to start having these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.